The world of Mario Maker is one that's quite literally built on a grid. You generally have a really easy time putting things on this grid, and you need special techniques to put things off of this grid, so to put things somewhere in between. The reason we want to do this is that, sometimes you want to build things off the grid. Sometimes a hitbox isn't in the right spot, or whatever for what you want to do in a level. And today I'm going to show you several techniques for how to put items off this grid, which would be called offset items. This guide is going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge of just different techniques, just because I'm just going to try to show off a variety of different ways to get this done. So the first main technique that everyone knows and uses very, very frequently is stacking. So whenever you make a stack, the item at the bottom is the one that determines the horizontal position. So if you have, for example, a large item and you need it to be somewhere in the middle, the small muncher here, which is spawn blocked by the ice, makes this muncher spawn in the middle of this block. Similarly, this large muncher in the bottom, which is also going to be spawn blocked by the ice, makes this small muncher in the stack spawn right in between these two blocks. And so like that, you can easily generate some offset items. Sometimes you want to stack things and not have them be like on ground. So let's say I want this muncher to be offset on a cloud, like one of these munchers to be offset on a cloud between two blocks. What I can do is have a Bill Blaster stack go all the way down from the bottom and have any one part of the Bill Blaster being spawn blocked. And as long as that's happening, it still counts as being in the stack. The Bill Blaster doesn't spawn and the muncher is offset. Here, this Bill Blaster has to be offset with a giant muncher to make this connection all be centered. Additionally, there's some other tricks that you can do to offset things horizontally, especially with parachutes. So both of these shells, they look like they're in this exact same position. However, the one on the bottom has a parachute, and that pushes it just far enough to the right that it will be able to hit a spring when a spring drops onto it. All right, so while these setups can help you offset something horizontally left to right, these setups allow you to offset an item vertically. This is very useful for controlling gaps. Like the lift or lava lift on a curved track is very useful in Kaizo levels, and you'll see this all the time. The claw will be more useful in contraptions, and you always have your standard slope to work with. So you see this trick used all the time in Kaizo levels to make buckets for shells. As if you don't use an offset item, it's a lot more annoying to hit a shell that is put into a little bucket like this. What you'll see a lot more frequently is a muncher on a lava lift on a curved track. And this makes it so that the height of the bucket on the right side is substantially lower. And it's much easier for Mario to very comfortably do this. Here's an example of how this tech is used. Here, this is a jump detector, and here we have an offset lift on a curved track. The jump detector works by the SMB2 mushroom jumping up and then detecting it. Here, the curved track with lift allows the SMB2 mushroom to travel less time to reach the note block here, and then trigger the device. So this offset trick allows the jump detector to go faster without having it go all the way up here where it would no longer work because the mushroom would be constantly banging up against the note block. Additionally, it's possible to squeeze some items in with a conveyor belt because their horizontal hitboxes will not necessarily be flush even when they're on the grid. So here, the springs are all on the grid normally, but when they're squished together with a conveyor belt, they squeeze in like an accordion and even give you a whole extra space here. Additionally, items in a stack generally consume less vertical space than they would normally on a grid. So here I have the same number of munchers in a stack versus just kind of piled on top of each other. And you'll see that this muncher stack loses one whole block of height, more or less, versus munchers that are just falling on top of each other, because each muncher here individually is a full 1x1 block. Additionally, the components of the stack matter. So different enemies in the stack will have different amount of vertical height. So even though these stacks on a grid would look equal height, boos have a higher vertical height in a stack than munchers do. So the top of this stack goes up a bit higher than this stack. You can use this to control hitboxes vertically and just move things around as needed. Or you can exploit this mechanic, especially in like lava levels, to make the illusion of walking on lava. So here we have some build blasters stacked on munchers. And here it just looks like regular lava, but you can actually walk on it. Additionally, you can use conveyors to move things slightly off the grid. So here I have this build blaster, which is going to be conveyed onto this ground block, but it's going to stop very early. It looks like a barely any horizontal distance. So here in SMB1, I can very clearly get both sides of this vine up here with the ground tile. However, I cannot do the same thing down here, and if I try to descend while on the right side of this vine, it even pushes me off. So you can use this trick to, for example, here, make vines in SMB1 that you can only grab from one side. Another thing to be mindful of is subpixel heights for many assets. So for most terrain assets, ground tiles, blocks, semi-solids, etc., those are all actually perfectly locked to the grid, like very flush. And several assets, such as lifts, lava lifts, seesaws, etc., those all will actually be ever so slightly lower than that. Even though it looks like it's right up to that grid line, it's a very small slight subpixel below. And so that will have a big impact on hitboxes. So here this muncher is roughly 2 by 2. And so here, when the muncher is on ground and then Mario standing on a semi-solid, we're fine. Here the lift is slightly lower, and so Mario has enough clearance to not get hit by a muncher again. Lift on lift, again, the distance is equal, so we're fine. But if we have a lift on a lift that goes above a muncher on ground tiles, now we're done. Now that actually does damage to Mario. And you can use this to control what sort of platforms can do damage. Now, again, we can use stacking and a lack of stacking to change how high different items go. So, for example, here I have thwomps with parachutes versus no parachute. And so without the parachute, the thwomp can stack, and with the parachute, it cannot stack. With a stack, this muncher goes a little bit lower than without the stack. And this flimsy lift, which is ever so slightly lower than the semi-solid, does allow Mario to get hit by that muncher. However, the one that is actually in a stack is completely safe for Mario to stay on the lift for. Another trick to be aware of is that gentle slopes, the open side of the gentle slope allows most things to spawn in. However, some enemies and items will be pushed ever so slightly away from the slope if they're pinched between the slope and a terrain asset. So here you can see that Fire Flower gets pushed a little bit to the side. Or many offsetting tricks to position items and enemies that don't involve stacking use items on tracks to push items around. Now, for some enemies, like this piranha plant, that works just fine. However, some items are going to be a lot more... are going to completely ignore the block on a track. In that situation, you can use a firebar or a burner on a track, which will still interact with these items and push them effectively. This is unique to firebar and burner and cannot be replicated with blocks on tracks and related. I'd like to end on several tricks that you can use to offset items in different scenarios that let you move things that can't be put on stacks, especially horizontally. The most common thing that you would ever want to change would be moving an item to be in between two blocks of the grid. However, P-switches, POWs, springs, for example, cannot be put in a stack, so you can't use a lot of the stacking tech that I showed you before. In these situations, I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that you can use and get a general feel for what sort of setups you can use to generate some offset items. And so here, one trick is to take advantage of the fact that pipe spawners will spawn items in the middle when they're vertical pipes. You can use a variety of items on tracks to take whatever item you need to into its halfway point. Clown cars are another basic tool to be able to put something in the middle of the grid. All you have to do is crush the clown car. You can also have winged blocks or winged hidden blocks to spawn items in the middle. These are all general tricks that you can use to move items around. These setups are all shown to work for horizontal worlds. Here are some similar tricks that work in vertical worlds, where you would be limited in how you need to scroll things in. And so similarly, just moving things to where you need them to go will work. Here, for example, I have a P-switch being pushed against an offset muncher to allow it to just drop a big distance. Whereas this conveyor has to be precisely placed so that this P-switch lands straight in the middle. And by having all these setups such that the important parts either have an assisted load or on the similar horizontal line, they're going to work fine even when you scroll into them in a vertical world. Lastly, here are some tricks that work for 3D world. Very similar to what we had before, we just have some different items because we don't have tracks anymore. Remember that you can also use clear pipes to get some of this done. So the tricks that I showed you today aren't the only techniques to offset items. However, they should give you some general ideas for how you might want to offset items and use them in your level. I hope you liked this guide. I hope it helped you. And if you'd like more content like this, feel free to subscribe. See you around. Later.